Welcome to the second day of the ITC. The core of theosophy is living an ethical life, a life in service to humanity. And what is inseparably connected with this is developing a selfless and compassionate motive to direct our lives. To gain insight into this, we will explore how, as the title of this lecture indicates, we can grow from ignorance to wisdom, what our roadmap is to do so, what stages we can recognize on the path, and how we can put this into practice. To do this, we will base our study on the first fragment of The Voice of the Silence. This book was written in August 1889 by H.P. Blavatsky, almost immediately after she had published The Secret Doctrine and founded the esoteric school. The book contains excerpts from the Book of the Golden Precepts and originates from the same tradition of Eastern mystic text upon which the Secret Doctrine is based. And this book, as we all know, is studied by many students of theosophy around the world and is considered as a book of inestimable value. The texts are often poetic and symbolic in nature and contain many thought-provoking esoteric concepts, of which we can ponder over and over again. And although we cannot always immediately grasp the true meaning of these concepts when we study the voice, from our first encounter with this book, it reveals something of the great wisdom and deep compassion concealed within. And something is awakened within us. Something that transcends our world of outer form, something that we might call soul memory, which reconnects us with what we once knew and can carry us beyond our present understanding. The keynote of The Voice of the Silence is compassion, which is weaved like a golden thread through all three fragments, deepening our motivation and insight to go the path. The book reveals how we can become a helper of humanity and how we can unfold all those qualities that are already latent within us. Thus, The Voice is a book of self-transformation, about growing in wisdom out of compassion for the sake of our fellow man. It shows us how we can grow from the personal self towards the all-self, which is the deepest essence of all living beings. On the title page of the book is written, dedicated to the few. And in our view, this indicates both the challenging nature of the voice and makes an appeal to go the inner path. To connect with the deep wisdom in the voice, it requires studying the text without prejudice, with an eager intellect, an open mind, and an open heart. And taking time to allow the depth which lies behind the often simple seeming words to sink in, and to keep on thinking the words over, so they may become a living power into our lives. This is a process that requires great dedication, in which it is not about studying for our own sake, as the starting point is always, how can we help others to gain insight into life based on truth? To put it in simple words, the better we understand life, the better we are able to help. The voice is composed of three parts, which cannot be viewed as separate sections, but must be considered and studied as a whole, to form a comprehensive vision. We find in the book three aspects of the same process that guides us to an ever-deepening identification with all that lives, an expansion of consciousness and love for humanity, and most important, the purification of our motives. The first fragment sheds light on what is meant by the voice of the silence, and the approach for how to go the voice can be heard. In the second fragment, the two paths, the emphasis is placed on the motive, and in the third fragment, the 7 paramitas are presented as subject of our study. H.P. Blavatsky states that the book is intended for the daily use of the lanus, the disciples. And the disciple is one who has already committed himself to compassion and dedicates his life to being a blessing for humanity. The daily use of the book is logical. The book contains very profound knowledge intended to help us develop at planes where we are in our stage of development relatively unfamiliar. And by continuously focusing our attention on this and gradually unfolding the qualities within, we come to recognize that also our perspective and understanding of what we are studying unfolds, and that the motive of compassion also grows stronger within us. To emphasize the depth of the voice of the silence, we cite a small piece of text that H.P. Blavatsky wrote to the members of the esoteric school. Read the voice, I say. It was written for and dedicated to you by masters' special orders. Therein you will find all your enquiries anticipated and answered. Let us now focus on the first fragment, which, like the book itself, is titled The Voice of the Silence. First, we can ask ourselves what this voice is. This voice that is also called nada, the soundless sound, that can only be heard when the disciple has ceased to hear the many other disturbing, superficial, and distracting sounds. In its highest aspect, we can say that the voice of the silence is the voice of the inner God, the atomic level of consciousness, where the pure and prefine ideas reside. At the end of the fragment, it is said that this voice, in its complete purity, can only be heard at the end of the path. Yet, in this fragment, it is also shown that we can hear the voice already at an earlier stage. At the beginning of the fragment, after we have met a number of essential conditions like having become indifferent to objects of perception, attaining the harmony within, and be united with the silent speaker. Then we read the following. And then to the inner ear will speak the voice of the silence, and will say, and then from that point on, the voice starts to give the disciple instructions on how to become more receptive for the inner voice. And to become ever more receptive for the voice, we must continually attune ourselves to the pure frequency by freeing ourselves from all influences of personal thoughts, and by directing our consciousness inwardly toward the Buddhic aspect of our consciousness, which is called dharana. By doing this, we develop, so to say, a Buddhic antenna. And the better we are able to do this, the more pure and the more clear we will hear the inner voice. Let us now take a look at the specific part of fragment 1, where the journey for the disciple and the development of consciousness he will undergo are shown based on 3 halls. These halls are the hall of ignorance, the hall of learning, and the hall of wisdom. The three halls give us a vision on the different planes of consciousness in which we have to learn lessons and to make an inner development. And this represents a deep inner path, because many aspects that are present in these halls are still largely unknown to us. When we study the three halls, we can distinguish four main aspects of training in order to activate or to develop the higher aspects of our constitution, including conscience, Buddhic imagination, intuition, and inspiration, all of which we can see as different levels of perceiving the voice of the silence. And the better we develop these qualities and make them the guiding force in our lives, the better we are able to learn the lessons we have to learn in each hall. Now, these four main aspects of training are to purify our motive, which means to grow from personal to impersonal, to learn to see through illusion, to focus on truth, which means developing wisdom, and to continually pass on what we have learned to others. In the following part of the lecture, we will now examine the three halls. The first hall is the hall of ignorance, avidya. It is the hall in which thou sawest the light, in which thou livest and shalt die. And as we can read in the voice, this hall is the world of our external forms that we can perceive with our senses and through which we give meaning to the world. The voice of the silence immediately gives us an important hint about this hall when it says, "If thou wouldst cross the first hall safely, let not thy mind mistake the fires of lust that burn therein for the sunlight of life." This means that we must strive to overcome all personal desires and learn to see through the illusion of this external world. Important to see is that this hall is related to the waking state of our consciousness, also called Jagrat in Sanskrit, which is strongly related to our external senses. So when we focus fully on what we perceive with our eyes and hear with our ears, we cannot see the inner vision or hear the inner sound. When our mind is fully occupied with the outer world, and it becomes impossible to perceive a deeper reality of life. The voice makes this clear to us when it says, "The mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple destroy the destroyer." Now, this sentence can easily give us the impression that we should not think at all. But an approach to understand this is to realize that there are two levels of thinking. Higher thinking, which is based on intuition, understanding, compassion, and unity, and lower, personal thinking. And when we recognize this, we can see that the great slayer refers to the lower thinking when it is not guided by the Buddhic aspect of our thinking, and causes, as explained in Plato's allegory of the cave very well, that we look like chained prisoners at illusory shadows on the wall and take them for real. So in the first hall, it are our old, limited thinking habits that we are attached to, that are holding us back. To grow in the first hall, we have to learn to see through the outer forms, and we have to let go of what we are attached to. Now, if we pay close attention to what is happening beyond the level at which we perceive the outer forms and let go of our attachments, we can see that there is within us a faculty that is able to observe, that is able to analyze, that is able to evaluate and to guide the entire process. Then we are no longer fully ignorant in the hall of ignorance, and we start to see that there is a deeper meaning why things are happening in life. And in doing so, we free ourselves from our identifications with the outer forms that keeps us trapped and chained in this hall. And when we start to see that ignorance of the illusory character of the outer forms is the main cause for all suffering and pain in the world, then compassion awakens in us. And when we detach from the outer forms by constantly making use of our supra-personal thinking, we connect with a stream of consciousness that leads us inwards. Learning to see through the illusion of the outer worlds starts a whole new learning process, which is strongly related to the next hall, the hall of learning. This hall represents the plane of consciousness just located above the outer atmosphere of the Earth, our globe D. This plane is both more ethereal and far more illusory and deceptive than our earthly plane. It encompasses, for example, the lower psychic and astral worlds. Because we have little experience in these planes of consciousness, we perceive them as if we are in a dream or dream state, called swapna in Sanskrit. In this state, our perception is scattered and fake. And although scattered and fake, it appears very real to our perception. And if we are not careful, it can have a very big attraction to us. We can become thoroughly entangled and blinded by the treacherous beauty of this hall and the abilities we can develop there. And how beautiful all the aspects of this hall may appear to us, they are both very illusory and unuseful for our present plane. On this point, the voice gives us a following warning. No blossom plucked into those regions has ever yet been brought down on earth without its serpent coiled around the stem. These serpents are the psychic abilities, the lower eddies, for which we are warned at the beginning of the voice, through which the senses are bewitched and our thinking gets intoxicated with the illusory character of that plane. Now, an important guideline provided by the voice is that this hall is therefore only needed but for thy probation, and that we must not linger in this plane, but divest ourselves from the dark garments of illusion. To put it in other words, if we want to hear the voice of the silence that resides at a higher plane, we have to learn to see through illusion in the hall of learning, as well as in the hall of ignorance, and become full self-conscious in these planes. We can manage to do that by remaining constantly attuned to our inner higher nature. And in doing so, inner hearing and inner seeing awakens in us, by which we can perceive a clear vision of truth. But when we stay attached to the outer forms in the first two halls, we fail to see the deeper reality that lies hidden behind these halls. And not knowing truth results in separation, suffering, pain, selfishness, sorrow, imbalance, and disharmony, as we can all too clearly see in our world today. We therefore see how important it is that the wisdom present in the higher planes is passed on to our world or our plane. And the more we realize this, the more we purify our motive and the more we will be able to pass on that wisdom to our fellow human man. To do so, we have to focus on the knowledge present in the third hall, the knowledge which is also known as jnana, divine wisdom. The hall of wisdom in the voice is described as the hall which lies beyond, wherein all shadows are unknown, and where the light of truth shines with unfading glory. This corresponds to the unveiled consciousness of Sushupti, the consciousness of Buddhi. Only through the pure light of wisdom and compassion that resides in our higher nature, we can see through illusion and distinguish the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the immortal from the mortal. And here we can find a very important insight. Because how can we learn to see through the illusion in ignorance in the first two halls? We can do this by focusing on the knowledge in the hall of wisdom, by focusing on the higher aspects of our thinking, and in this process, the more we focus on the hall of wisdom, the faster we learn, and the more we will hear the voice of the silence. In this process, it is good to realize that although we have to go the path alone, we cannot go the path without guidance. In this respect, the voice warns us not to seek the sages in the hall of ignorance and not in the hall of learning, because the sages do not abide in these halls. The sages are to be found in the hall of wisdom, and these sages are the sages of all ages, and are all part of the lodge of wisdom and compassion. They can help us because they are ahead of us, and they have attained divine wisdom. They gained their knowledge by studying and examining truth. They learned to see through all illusions and have gained first-hand knowledge of the deeper workings of nature. They have learned to work in harmony with it, and as a result, live in unity with the divine. Their aim is to pass on their wisdom to humanity. Therefore, they are our teachers. And in the way the masters work themselves in gaining truth, we can find important instructions on how we can develop wisdom ourselves. By examining this knowledge, which means to build up a universal vision of life. By testing them for truth, which means to see if we can find examples of it. By living in harmony with the knowledge we have, which means to be a living expression of it, and to continuously pass on the wisdom we have acquired. And in this way, we honor truth and follow in the footsteps of the sages. Following the example of the sages explicitly does not mean that we must wait to help others until we ourselves are wise, as sometimes is assumed. On the contrary, from the perspective of the one life, you must always focus on passing on wisdom, because there are others who know less than us, just as there are always others who know more than us. Thus, wisdom is the child of loving deeds. Out of compassion, you will want to help others, which will lead you to seek greater wisdom. And as you grow in wisdom, you will see more and more opportunities to help, as symbolized by the voice. Behold the hosts of souls. Watch how they hover over the stormy sea of human life, and how exhausted, bleeding, broken-winged, they dropped one after the other on the swelling waves. This image touches the heart and guards us against separation, leading us to deepen the motive of compassion even further. Thus, we see that the disciple becomes increasingly active in elevating the whole, until it is entirely natural to think and act in this way, realizing that all beings are essentially one, and no personal element is left in him. Helping from an esoteric point of view can be done in different ways. At first, we help to wipe off the tear from the sufferer's eye. We can offer shelter and protection so that our fellow man feels safe and experiences connection again. The next step can be that we try to understand what has happened and what is the root cause for suffering. Knowing this, we can also give insight based on universal wisdom on how to restore harmony. And in this very short outline of an example, we see that compassion and wisdom go together, that they are essentially one and the same. Well, till so far in this lecture, we have made a long journey, and we have to realize that our journey is, in a sense, boundless. So for now, we will drive our journey one step further, because behind the third hall, the hall of wisdom, we find the valley of bliss. The indestructible source of omniscience, the realm of full spiritual consciousness, Akshara. And as we draw nearer to the source, the path becomes more narrow, steep, and thorny. And while we continue, we always have to remember that the divine does not descend. Rather, it is our task to ascend. The disciple that now slowly becomes a master has cast off every form of selfishness and has become one with the inner God, thereby becoming completely one with the one life, and this is the state of consciousness that is called Turiya. What we have learned till so far, and which is also stated in the voice, is that we cannot go the path without becoming that path ourselves. It is after all a path of self-transformation, and at the end we become one with the voice of the silence. We become that voice. Behold, speaks the voice again. Thou hast become the light, thou hast become the sound. Thou art thy master and thy God. Thou art thyself, the object of thy search. In reflection of all we have examined, we see that the voice of the silence offers us a true roadmap, which leads us through different stages from ignorance to wisdom. Every step we take on the path matters. Every aspect of what we are right now has to be investigated. We have to learn to see through illusion. We have to let go personal desires and keep our focus on truth. Most important is to purify our motives. In order to become a helper of humanity, we have to develop wisdom and continually pass it on. And in this, we see how closely fragment 1 and fragment 2 are interwoven. Because where at the end of fragment 1 we have become the object of our search, fragment 2 continues seamless with the question. And now, O teacher of compassion, point thou the way to other men. Behold, all those who knocking for admission, await in ignorance and darkness, to see the gate of the sweet love flung open. And with this we see that we are on a path of an endless journey, and that compassion is the keynote of that path. Thank you for listening.